Hi everyone, this is Richard. In this video, let's talk about the state of Dart in 2019. So I've done this a year ago and talked about the state of Dart, what I thought of it at the time, and where I thought it would go in the future. And so I wanted to do one final video on the state of Dart, where it's going, and what I think about it. It's amazing how many things have changed just in 1 year. A little bit from Dart, a little bit on Dart, and I think a lot of it for me personally. And as I've changed, and I'm sure you've changed as well, how you've changed, I'm not sure, but you might not know how you've changed, but we all change with time. And I think it's important to accept that and move from that change itself. So Dashto Dartlang is closing, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the origins of this particular channel, and then on to Dart. So, as you probably already know, this isn't a real YouTube channel, right? So I don't monetize on it. You don't see commercials. I don't ask you to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification icon, right? Although I could say that very quickly, right? So I don't know if that's a good thing. But anyway, that's always a dead giveaway that this is not a real YouTube channel. This is, in my mind, more of a dumping ground, not in a negative context, but in a reason to document my experiences on learning Dart. So let's talk about some of the origins of the channel. I've talked about them before, but I wanted to just sum it up one last time. Originally, when it came out, Dart seemed to be a very good language to me, and I really liked the idea of it. I liked the strong typing. I liked the static typing as well. And I thought that those were great features, and I really enjoyed learning it. The problem with it is that there was no good book. There was no good resource at all whatsoever for me to actually go through, learn, and to be able to say, okay, now I understand Dart. There was nothing. In fact, I had to buy multiple books, go to multiple sources, learn a little bit here, a little bit there, and it was extremely painful, but it was still doable. The original motivation for me of putting it in video was to document my experiences, and it was mostly for my children. I was hoping that when my children grew up and they were old enough to learn to program, that they would be able to look at these videos and learn to program and have a little bit less pain than I did, right? So I guess it's always the hope of the previous generation to make the younger generation suffer that much less. Well, fast forward 5 years, and it didn't work that way. So my children are not really interested in Dart. I guess one of the main reasons is they don't really want to learn from their dad, right? Who really blames them for that? But I do want them to program, but probably going more towards JavaScript, even though I don't like JavaScript, and Python, even though I don't really like Python, just because they're more available, the resources are more available. As I was hitting those roadblocks in the past, they were very painful to get over, but I was determined. I forced my way through it to learn from a beginner's point of view, going from nothing to learning Dart. But as the years have been going by, and it has been 5 years, unbelievable, it has been 5 years, and as the learning goes by, I hit this barrier that I just can't get beyond. Because the documentation, the resources that I have, just start to thin out, right? So they're more, when we're talking about the basics, a lot more documentation. As it thins out, less people are using this, then it becomes a lot more painful. For example, with Aqueduct, there were a few areas when I was learning the Aqueduct server framework, I was trying to go through that, and I was starting to run into the same blocks that I ran into a few years ago. But because fewer people use the Aqueduct framework than they do, say, Flutter or, say, basic Dart, there was not a lot of help that I could look towards in order to help me through. And I had to look at the code, try it again, and test and test and test. But it's not something that I had really the time to do. And so it was taking me a long time, and this just reminded me, and then I started to move to React, and I started to move back to Flutter, and I was starting to realize that the task of learning Dart is more of a chore than it is fun. And when that actually happens, that becomes a problem. And I'm saying that just for me. If it is fun for you, keep up with it. If it's a little bit of a struggle and you have the time, please keep up with it. I just don't have the time, and unfortunately, that's just where I am in life right now. And if I didn't have the time to commit to it, it just starts to become more of a burden, something you have to do, and not something you really want to do. And that's where the problem actually is. And that's why I'm going to end the Dash to Dartlang channel. This has been going on for almost a year now. So I've been pushing through, but I've been more struggling through it and more making it struggling through, even though it was a chore. So it's not like one of those last minute decisions. So let's go over Dart in general. So as it stands, we can use Dart on the console, the web, just vanilla Dart on the web. There's Angular Dart, and then there's Flutter. You can use Hummingbird. It's new since my last state of Dart. It's a framework where you can potentially, it's still in alpha stages, get Flutter code and simply compile it into something you can use in the browser. Really interesting stuff. And then on the mobile, there's Flutter, and on the server, there's Aqueduct. There's a number of frameworks. Nothing really rose to the top. So it's kind of one of many, but it's probably one of the better ones in my opinion. It's probably one of the maybe more popular ones. And I just want to review that I think Dart is a great language. It has lots of features that are really awesome. I really like formatting. So in Python, I know that you have to have a specific format. If you don't, it's not going to run. And that's on purpose because it's readable. With specifically Dart, it doesn't have to be in the correct format, but there's a standardized format that you right-click, hit format, and the formatting is done for you. And it's very readable, it's very nice, and I love it. I know other languages do have this, but that's one of the features that I love with Dart that we don't see in I think JavaScript, I don't think it really has that, and maybe it does. But I just think that's an awesome feature. I just wanted to mention that. We have both ahead of time and just-in-time compilation, and it's fast. It is fast. It's not like Python. Python, I guess you could say a lot of things, but it's not fast. Dart has been made from the very beginning a fast language, and it's familiar. Again, in the very beginning, they wanted it to be a familiar language. They wanted it to be very quick that if you knew JavaScript or Java, that you could automatically jump to it and learn it very quickly. But that familiarity makes it a great first language too, right? So if you know Dart, then you understand the principles of typing, object orientation, or object-oriented, I think that's correct. Then you learn some of the ideas and the concepts very easily. And then you can apply that to JavaScript or to Java. And when I look at Java code, I know that there's a few things inside there that is different, but it's very easy to pick it up after you learn something like Dart, because it's just the opposite. If you learn Java and then you go to Dart, it's easy to pick up, and so is the reverse. So that's why Dart is just a great language. But there are problems with Dart. Wherever, if you Google it itself, you can just search and see what people think about it. There are design philosophy differences. Some people say, I don't like this at all, and that's perfectly fine. Just how you make the language, you always have to have some good features, but there's no such thing as a perfect language. You might not like some features from it, and that's perfectly understandable. But at the same time, generally speaking, I think it's a great language. Then there's the community and the documentation, and I do want to talk about that. So first of all is the community. Even after all these years, the community is overwhelmingly Google. It is not exclusively, but it is overwhelmingly. I once went to a Dart conference, and I was a little bit surprised and a little bit disappointed that it was overwhelmingly Google. Everybody there was a Google employee. Again, not everybody, but let's be honest, it was a huge number. And it gives me the idea that Dart is more, and Flutter and all the other projects is open source, but not really open culture. And what I mean by that is I think of something like Android, right? So Android is open source. It's, I think, the Apache license, and it's free software, and they do accept bug fixes, features, and stuff from other people. But because it's so strongly controlled by Google, it really isn't an open culture. It isn't something that they accept contributions, large numbers, compared to something like GNOME, where GNOME basically it's one of the desktop operating systems on the Linux kernel, and they accept contributions from many different companies, many different individuals, and all work together. That's not what Dart is. That's not what Android is. That's not a bad thing. because there are some good features behind that. But the problem with it is, if Google doesn't want to go this direction, it generally doesn't go into that direction. So one of my big problems was, as a beginner, I would wish that people would focus the language towards beginners, because I think it would be a great first language. But the upper echelons in Google is not really interested, so it's really not going to happen. So it's up to the community, but if the community is overwhelmingly Google, it's just not going to happen, right? So it's one of those problems, one of those barriers that we run into. It is not anybody at Google's fault. It is not anybody's fault at the Dart team. That's just their priorities. I disagree with the priority, but I respect that they have to make priorities, and I respect that there are limitations, right? So it's not a criticism. It's just, this is the way I see the world, or at least the community, in Dart. And the way I see the future, it's not as the same as I saw it last year. Last year, I thought that the Dart language was going to really develop a lot. That it was going to go maybe through Flutter, and then it was going to expand, and then people would know the language and say, oh, I'll use it in other things. But it really isn't expanding like that. Now, admittedly, it could. 10, 20 years from now, it might be the number one language that's being used. But I'm not so sure. Now, I don't think there's any threat of it ending. I can't imagine anybody at Google saying, we decided just to throw it away and let's just start over again. It's just not a reasonable expectation for that to happen. So some people say, yes, Google throws away projects left and right. Okay, fine. But I can't imagine any manager, anybody, even the CEO of Google, thinking that that would be a good idea. It just wouldn't make any sense. They just put too much into it, and it's a good resource. It's not like it sucks, okay? But I see it more of being one of those popular niche languages, right? So nothing that's going to be used for in everything. It's not going to be like C++. It's not even going to be Java. It's not even going to be a lot of things. It's going to be one of those niche languages. You might use it for Flutter, and that's it. You're not going to use it for other stuff. But if you want something on the server, you'll probably still stick with Java, or you might even use Python and use Django or something like that. But you really wouldn't use Dart. Not that you couldn't, but that's the popularity. That's what we're talking about. That's what I'm talking about here. So technically, the language is not limited. It's very effective language. It's very fast language. It's easy to read. It's great. But because the community is not a bunch of people, it's mostly in Google, it's going to be limited for quite some time. Hopefully, that's not always going to be the case, but that's the way it is, and that's how I see it right now. And again, I can't stress, I'm sorry to repeat myself. It's not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it is limiting, and that's where I think is the problem. I'm not making a call to, hey, they have to open up or anything like that. It may, because the world in which I see Dart may not be all that bad. So just because it is a popular niche language, maybe that's all it really needs to be. That's a good enough reason to learn it. It's a good enough reason to use it, but it's not a good enough reason to put all of your eggs in that Dart basket. So that encourages developers to learn Dart, learn C, learn C++, learn C#, learn all of these other languages in addition. Different tools for different purposes. So let's talk about Dart the platform. Since last year, couple of years maybe, Flutter came out, and I thought it was going to be so good that everyone was going to use it. And a lot of people do. It's very popular. But there are other platforms, right? And some people love those platforms. I think Reactive or something like that. And then there's Xamarin or something like that. So there's other platforms that are compilable to other platforms, right? So you can use iOS or Android. You can use Flutter to compile one source code for both places. You can do the same thing with other languages. Not a lot, but it's a nice feature. There's Fuchsia. I still think Fuchsia is going to be awesome when it comes out. All right, I have a lot of hopes for that. I hope I'm not disappointed, but from what I'm reading on that, it's going to be great. But we have to keep in mind, Dart for Flutter does not mean Dart for all. If you're going to use Flutter, if you're going to use it on Fuchsia, it doesn't mean you have to use it for anything else. So I can really see a world where a lot of people use Flutter, and they use Dart on Flutter, but that's it. Everything else is not Dart, right? So I would hope to see in the future a lot more developer engagement. whether it's going to happen or not from the community to using Dart, not just Dart on Flutter, but other things as well, on the server, on other features completely. I would love to see that, but is it going to happen? Well, we'll have to see. I'm not optimistic anytime soon. Maybe 5-10 years. Hey, you never even know 1 year, okay? So basically, in summary, the possible futures for Dart. Last year, I was thinking Dart would be a dominant language. Not the dominant language, a dominant language. So in other words, it would be one of the more popular ones. It would be way up there with Java. It would be way up there with Python, okay? So people would learn Flutter, and then they would move from Flutter to other projects. And again, that still can happen, but I don't see the world, even in the future, even 5-10 years from now, I just don't see it that way. Could be wrong, because I don't even know what's going on 6 months from now. But I just don't see that. I could see a world where Dart is not used much at all, where we have the basic Flutter, which is in Dart, and I could see some plugins. So they're already working on plugins for Fuchsia, so other languages where you can develop in other languages and use it on this platform. So I can imagine something like that. There are frameworks, toolkits that have language bindings for other languages. I can see that. That's a possibility. I don't think it's really going to happen, but I could definitely see that as a possibility itself. One of the reasons I don't see that as happening is speed. It would slow things down if you had those language bindings. But I think the world in the future is going to be Dart for Flutter, every other language for everything else. I think it's a shame because Dart is capable of so much more, but I don't think it's a shame because Dart doesn't have to be the language of everything. All right? It could be, and that's the shame of it all, but I don't think it's going to be. So with that, that's the end of the channel. My attitude towards Dart as a language has not changed. It's a great language. I love it. As a platform, my attitude towards it has not really changed either. I'm very hopeful for it. I think it's been wonderful, but I don't think it has the future that I was hoping it would back a year ago even. I'm not expecting to go away, but the supporting community is just too limited, and it hasn't grown much since its inception outside of Google. So if it hasn't grown that much in all this time, I don't expect it to really grow that much in the future. I just don't. Because of those limitations, it's hard to really advance from a beginner. Maybe if I was really a lot more skilled, or maybe if this was my permanent job that I could really spend time in learning and experimenting on it, it would be great. But because I don't have that luxury in my life right now, learning Dart just isn't fun any longer. And I think that's why it's just time to move on. What am I going to move on to? I'm not sure. I think I'm going to learn a little bit of a little bit of Python also, and learn it along with my kids just to see if push them along the way and learn it along with them. Is it going to be as fun as Dart? Well, maybe, because there's going to be more resources. Hopefully there'll be quality resources. I like it as much as Dart? I can tell you right now I'm not. I'm not a big fan of some of the structures and stuff like that. So I think I'll love Dart more, but in terms of will the platform be supporting enough that it'll make the learning fun again? Well, we'll have to wait and see. I wanted to say thank you for everyone. And I know a lot of people just lately have been subscribing to the channel, and I feel really bad. I really do. And so I wanted to get this video out sooner rather than later. But if you're seeing this now and you're a new subscriber, I'm really sorry, but I wish all of you the best. And looking back on it, 5 years ago, it was pretty awesome. So we didn't get as far as I hoped we would, right? So I hoped we would get through the servers and get through really getting fancy applications, and I really hoped we would get to that point. But we didn't. But quite honestly, we did pretty well. So if you start from the beginning and you go all through the end, I guess we had a good run. The journey was awesome, but all things eventually have to come to an end, right? And I think that that's the point. The end point is, yes, an end point is making an application, but the journey is by far the most important. And if you're having fun, keep it up. Don't quit. If it's not fun anymore, well, maybe it's not for you, but maybe you should change to something else. So for me, this is the end. But for you, if you have the time to put into it, if you have the time to continue learning and really put your heart and soul into it, or even if you want to go to another language, great. Keep it up. Keep learning. This lifelong learning, the flexibility of learning different and new tasks, no matter where you are in life, is going to be super important. And don't stop that, or else you get old, right? So I'm not going to stop learning, but I'm going to stop here with Dart. But I think of all things, just remember that whatever language you use, if you learn and go on to build an app or a framework or even a new language yourself, keep in mind the documentation, right? Keep in mind education and teaching people to use your application, framework, or language. Because there just might be another person out there, some strange weirdo on the internet, who make another language, some weirdo on the internet, who may make some random weirdo on the internet who just might make a channel talking about your product. Thanks again, and best wishes.